This is Atari R&D podcast.
And he brought up an ARPANET node there in my cubicle, and we played with email at a time when you could send it and it would maybe get there today, maybe weeks from now. I spec'd out for two guys a 600 line a minute band printer with a quietized cover that cost $30,000 in 1980. It went right through that was delivered next week.
I'm Kevin Savitz, and this is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. Jess Jessop was a software engineer at Commodore, writing diagnostic software for the Commodore 64. Then, at Atari, he started in the test and repair group for the Atari 400 and 800 SALT diagnostic cartridge. Then moved to corporate research, Atari's R&D department under Alan Kay, where he was hardware team leader for the Sierra project, Atari's unfinished laptop product. This interview occurred April 15, 2015. Mostly want to talk about Atari, but since you were headhunted out of Commodore, let's talk about Commodore and what you did there.
Sure. Actually, the funniest story about working for Commodore was how I got hired. I thought I was applying as a hardware engineer. Mm-hmm. I went in and interviewed with a guy, and for most of the time he talked about my software skills, and he said, okay, and he gave me a job offer as a software engineer. And I said, okay, and I started when it was the CBM machines, and we were just finishing up the Commodore 64. Mm-hmm. And I was in the factory in Sunnyvale there and wrote the diagnostics for it, for final tests and checkout and all of that. Did a little work with helping iron out some bugs in the sound system, but that was basically what I did. I wrote the diagnostics for final tests there, and one day while I was sitting there at my desk, I got a call from a headhunter who had managed to navigate the engineering thing to get to the guy who was doing diagnostics for the Commodore, and said, hey, would you rather do this for Atari? And, Jack Tramiel wasn't the nicest guy to work for, and his motto was, fire the engineers and ship the product. So we all knew we only had a few more months left at most. I was absolutely sure, yeah, I'd love to go to Atari. So I moved to Atari.
Okay.
And I started with the test and repair group. Our mission was to create the diagnostics and create a repair strategy and get service centers all over the country going.
All right, so this was June 1981, so this would be for the Atari 400, 800.
Correct.
Okay.
And we did a big, huge PR campaign launched about Atari service. There was nationwide advertising with a picture of a map and all these Atari service centers popping up. In my group, we did what they call the SALT diagnostic cartridge. Oh. And basically, you'd stick it in there, and it would go through the test and give the technician an idea of what to replace.
Mm-hmm. I have one on my desk behind me somewhere.
All right. I was responsible for the last release of the SALT cartridge.
Oh,
Other people did it up until then, but we put out the last release. We didn't know it was at the time, but yeah, and we had a guy named Vance Johnson. And Vance had actually worked with me in the Commodore group. He had been working on the diagnostic program there when I got there. And then he left and ended up back at Atari. We worked together on the SALT cartridges. They decided that they wanted to have a service presence in every design group in Atari.
Okay.
So Ray Nord had mandated that I, representing the test group, be on every single design group in the company.
Okay.
Which was not really well received, but a lot of fun.
All right, I have several questions. First of all, when you were working on the SALT cartridge, you said you worked on the last version of it. Were you adding features, fixing bugs? What was involved in creating the test cartridge? Also, what does SALT stand for?
Wow. It's been so long, I don't even remember right now. Standalone something test. I forget what the L was for.
Okay.
But I think, and it's been so long, I believe we were at like SALT 5.0, and it was primarily a bug fix. There wasn't a lot of feature enhancements by then. And we kind of already really run the gamut of what could be tested from a software perspective and isolated at that point in time on that machine.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't really designed for that to happen, and so you could isolate a memory card, you could isolate, that it was a disk drive or something like that, but when it came to more than that, you just sent it back to the factory, and they had an in-circuit test emulator that.
They wanted a service presence in all of the design groups.
Correct.
So, what is a design group, first of all?
Any team that's developing a product.
Okay.
And so that covered the home computer division, coin-op division, and corporate R&D.
Okay.
And we never really got much penetration in the coin-op. They didn't like us there. They resisted us being there. My mission was to make sure that if an LED or a socket or a bit of code could make it easier to fix, we thought about that before we built it. And that it wasn't in the coin-op division. The only thing I ever really worked with them on there was a pop. They did this wild laser disc driven point of purchase display for CES one year, and I was involved with that. But other than that, didn't really do much else with the coin-op. With the home computer division, I was involved with the 1200 project and a couple of others like that. On the corporate research, I was brought into the Sierra project and very quickly fell in love with Atari corporate research. And the guy that was heading the project up, a guy named Dave Sampson, the project manager, liked me and asked me to come onto his team. So I did my minimum, I think it was 6 months in the test group, and then moved to corporate research.
Awesome. All right, before we get to corporate research,
right.
You said several interesting things. First of all, I'm interested in the point of presence display with the laser disc. I've seen some stuff on YouTube about this. Was this a laser disc player that was like run by an Atari 800?
Exactly. Yeah, it was a laser disc that had an Atari 800 interface to it, and a video, and it was the Alan Alda era of commercials that we had built into this laser disc that would tailor its presentation to users as a point of sale. And the fun part about that one was it was kind of a neat little project. We had to build an interface to the laser disc. There wasn't one, obviously.
That was my next question, is how did you do that?
The Grass Valley group did that.
Okay.
The guys up in Grass Valley Research designed an interface for it. And they didn't quite get it done in time for CES that year, and it absolutely had to be at CES. So we basically put a guy in the box with a double monitor, and he queued up the laser disc. When people walked up and pushed the keys, he'd see what they wanted, and he'd queue up the right laser disc sequence.
Wow. You Mechanical Turked it?
Yes, with a guy literally in the box pushing the keys.
I am dumb. Are you serious?
I'm serious.
No.
Totally. That was just for CES. We got through CES doing it that way, and because it just didn't quite work yet. And we had it out in the stores working by Thanksgiving.
I'm sorry. I'm at a loss. Wow. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Well, it absolutely had to be there, and it almost worked. But you couldn't just turn it loose for people to play on it. And we went, well, what are we going to do? We can't not do this. And there was a big enough box that a guy could sit in there. So we just,
Okay, what happened when he had to pee? Or
Oh, people traded turns. I never was in the box, but we had people assign shifts, and it was part of the floor duty on CES that year. The engineers had to spend part of the time in the box.
Oh, that's so ridiculous. Don't want to get in the box.
It was kind of crazy, but it wasn't that bad, They put in their request, and we had a little cheat sheet there with that means this code on the laser disc. You can punch it in, and it would play that little segment.
Wow. Okay. You said you worked on the 1200 XL. Yeah. What can you tell me about that?
It was just really a really slight remake and a couple chip reduction on the 800.
Well, I know what it was. I mean, what was your work? How were you
Oh,
involved on it?
or just to try to tell them, let's put an LED here and a piece of software there so that we can, make sure that we can do a better job of testing at this time and isolate down to a component instead of a big board or a major piece. Not an awful lot. I went to a bunch of design meetings, but mostly I was just there. There was a lot, back at that point in time, the home computer division was so big and so booming that, you go to one of these design meetings, there's 30 people in the room. You just keep track of what they're saying, and unless it's actually yours, you just kind of
Zone out.
yeah. Okay, I'm here, and if anybody asks, I'll make sure you remember we need an LED here, right? give me a hook so that I can test that. It's kind of not. It wasn't a significant role really in the process.
So we're ready to talk about your newfound love of corporate research?
Oh yes.
Okay. All right. So you did your minimum time, and then you moved into corporate research. What is corporate research, and why do you love it?
It was an amazing place. The first thing you realized when you went there was that it was a very odd building. The second floor was bigger than the first floor. It was a 2-story building, and it kind of went out and became bigger at the second floor. And we called it the White Castle. It was all white, shiny kind of stuff.
Okay.
And you walked in, and of course, like all Atari buildings, there were Atari games all over the lobby and things like that. And people, kind of wandering around aimlessly looking different. And there was 2 different groups. The corporate research was on the ground floor. Corporate research engineering was in the ground floor, and what did they call themselves? Research scientists, basically, were in the second floor. And Alan Kay ran the second floor, and Ted Hoff ran the first floor. They were co-vice presidents at the time. And basically, the amazing part of Atari at that point was that we had so much money, nobody cared. Spend whatever you want, do whatever you want. In essence, if you can spend it on an asset, that keeps it here, because otherwise Warner Communication takes it at the end of the month anyway. So we might as well keep it here.
It was one of those situations where you had budget to spend, and if you don't spend it, you lose it. So let's spend it.
And it was $225 million a quarter profit at the time that Warner was taking away anyway. So it was for our budgets, it was totally unlimited. We could do whatever we wanted. And they basically had a charter to hire the very best and brightest, no matter what it took, from wherever. They were trying to recreate a Xerox PARC type of thing. And to tell you the truth, I felt like I was the complete fish out of water. I was the one guy that didn't belong there at all. Everybody else was professors and PhDs and people that had with 10 years of core Intel work and just amazing people. And I'd been a field engineer who'd managed to get into engineering kind of through the back door, and I didn't have any credentials or background and felt really kind of out of place with all these guys. But it was an amazing group. And next thing I know, David asked me to be the hardware team leader for the Sierra project.
Okay. And the Sierra project was, for listeners who do not know?
A super first generation laptop. Initially, we started out as a 68,000 Unix kind of box we were going to make. Quickly, because of Ted Hoff, transitioned to an Intel-based. And at the time, the architecture was an 8286 as the back-end processor running a version of Unix, and a front-end processor, an 8088, running DOS. And Paul Wells, the chief architect for the 8286, actually handed me the first piece of silicon off the line. We were at that point where it was just starting to be a real computer. And that was the basic idea. We were creating a new version of a laptop based on, we were looking to do a graphical user interface like Star, of course, because of Alan Kay, and Unix back end to get the horsepower, but a DOS front end to be compatible with the rest of the world. And we got a great design, and we built an amazing set of chips, and then the world blew up, and it never came out the door.
Yeah. So was that most of your time in research, was working on that project?
Yeah, it was. I was a hardware team leader, and I designed the multiprocessor memory access controller. We had a design goal. They have at least 4 different processors be able to share the same memory without getting in each other's way.
Wow.
And I designed a DMA controller, discrete DMA controller that accomplished that. And so there was a group that made a sound chip. The Amy sound chip was a subgroup on our team. Mm-hmm. And they made a sound room and took a whole chroma organ and digitized every sound and made a really awesome sound chip that was custom for it. Wow. And the chip got actually made. I believe it got sold to Commodore eventually. And the last I heard that they were selling off pieces of the design to Commodore, so I don't know if they got the memory controller or not. But we built an initial prototype and kickstarted it and got it up and running, but we never got one that was actually in the form factor or ready to show or anything like that. We didn't get that far. The Unix operating system was a really special, unique thing. A guy named Christian Kennedy or Kennedy Christian. I always called him Christian. Was designed a thing called Snowcap. That was a cap to go over Unix, basically a front end for Unix to allow it to interface with DOS and the users in an easy graphical way.
So kind of a bridge between Unix and DOS.
Right.
It sounds like a complicated system with 2 operating systems and all those chips talking to memory. It sounds maybe over-designed.
Well, these days we wouldn't think it was anything. This tablet I'm sitting here talking to you on is doing all of that and more.
Sure.
At the time, it was all within hardware spec. My biggest doubt was that we would have any software that made it work worth a damn for generations. We were delivering hardware that could do a lot of stuff. Just, you're still using a stone axe to grate the software.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure we could ever get the form factor down in the heat to where it was actually the portable design goal, because in the end of the day, that was the first thing we noticed when we turned on the prototype was the running joke was, the first accessory will be a heat exchanger and you can turn off your furnace.
So when you say it, we all know this product didn't come out. You say the world blew up. Which blowing up was it this time? When Warner sold?
No. This was when the stock suddenly, our profit suddenly tumbled. We had a series of really bad write-offs that they had to do from the game cartridge, and suddenly we had competition in the game cartridge market. So being fat, dumb, and happy there, we went from 220 million a quarter profit to about 20 million a quarter profit. And it basically, I say they sent in the accounts. All of a sudden, they started counting your paper clips, and you knew that if you were on a path that required lavish spending, this was not going to continue.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. There were about 50 people or so on the team. I'm not sure exactly altogether, the hardware, software team, and the sub-teams. But at least 10 new companies got started, because after that, nobody wanted to go to work for a regular company.
Mm-hmm. Are you aware of any other interesting projects that particularly appealed to you within the corporate research?
Yeah, one of them was that I always liked was the first interactions between exercise machines and the 800 in a game. Can't think of the guy's name right now. Oh, come on. He was a independent game developer sort that basically leaned on Atari with some IP leverage to get a job in corporate research, and they gave him a cubicle and let him do what he wanted. And He hooked an exercise bike up to an 800 and made a game where you rode up a river with African natives attacking you. And you had to pedal harder to get away from them.
Nice.
And that was pretty cool. I like that. Can't think of his name right off the top of my head. It's been a long time. The other thing that another couple of memories about that being there that were kind of important, special to me was Alan Kay used to have what he called brown bag lunches. Mm-hmm. And essentially, anybody that wanted to could bring your lunch, and we'd go sit in a conference room, and he'd have a topic. And it would be some, current pressing thing, and he'd talk it through. And he'd give a talk, and then there'd be a discussion. And it was totally amazing. He introduced me to the idea of the Dynabook, which essentially we're talking on now.
Right, yeah.
And basically he was implanting dreams in a whole generation of young engineers. And his motto at the time was, if it can be achieved in the next 5 years, I don't want to talk about it. But it was amazing. I loved it. It was one of my favorite things, going to his lunches.
Yeah.
And another personally kind of amazing thing for me was that back then we were still designing hardware on drafting boards. Mm-hmm. I had a big old drafting board with electric eraser and all that good templates and good stuff. And you're busy during the day, so you stay in the evening to actually do your design work. And a number of times I'd be sitting at my drafting board working on the memory controller, and Ted Hoff would drop by and just sit down and talk about what I was doing and let me ask him questions. And it was just really, it was his kind of way of touching base with people. Anybody that was there after 7, 8 o'clock still working, he'd tend to stop by and say hi. Mm-hmm. But it was just a real neat opportunity to get to have that interaction, because he was my boss's boss's boss. Mm-hmm. So it's not people you see every day.
Right.
But in the same building, and it was just kind of nice. He'd stop by.
Any other interesting projects that you saw going on in research?
Tell you the truth, that's all that pops up right on the top of my head. I mean, we were all of our group was totally focused on the Sierra project and all the sub projects to it. Mm-hmm. And what the guys did up in the research scientist group was always kind of vague to anybody. I'm not, I only interacted with them just a little bit. Oh, there's one other fun story there. As I put up my first ARPANET node while I was there.
Really?
Yeah. I was working on a replacement for the 810 disk drive, the old Atari 800 disk drive, mm-hmm. with a Zilog single chip controller, a Z8, and a Western Digital controller and just as a side project, because it had been something I'd been working on and been involved with. That was another group.
This is something that never saw the light of day, I assume.
I don't think it did. It was a home computer project. This was it was a replacement for the 810. Okay. I don't know if it got finished in Atari. It didn't while I was there.
Okay.
I actually left and designed what I thought through there for a company that Concord Data Systems that was making a bunch of different drives, and I designed an Atari compatible drive for them after I left Atari that was based on that Z8 and Western Digital chip. But anyway, Zilog had wanted me to use their Z8 chip, and the only way to program it was with a Zilog Z8000 Zeus Unix box. So they gave me one and put it in my computer, in my cubicle. It was about the size of a medium-sized small refrigerator. And it was the version of Unix back when they had to distribute it as source. Mm-hmm. So you had to compile your operating system to bring it up. And we had, and I'd just done that, and I'd started using the cross compiler for the Z8, and it was just kind of a background project that I was working on. And we had just recruited a guy named John Palovich, the infamous Hacker Jack. Mm-hmm. He had just finished at MIT, and he joined our software group on the Sierra team. And John tried to get Atari to give him a computer to put up on ARPANET. We had big deck computers, and it was not a big deal. There was a whole section for that. And there was no money restrictions. They had to throw in any computer he wanted, except when he asked for it for ARPANET, and it was military related. They went, oh, no, no. Atari, we don't do that. Right. Sorry, no. So he didn't get a computer. Well, one day he was in my cubicle, and he happened to notice I had this Unix box. I was asking him for some help on the Unix thing, because I was new to Unix. And he says, by the way, he says, could we use this for something? Yeah, whatever. It's mine. They gave it to me personally. And he said, okay. So we could put up an ARPANET node. All we needed to have at the time that we didn't have was a modem that could dial out. Didn't have to receive. It just had to dial out. So we got a requisition through to get a dial-out modem, calling it for some other project. We hooked it up there, and he brought up an ARPANET node there in my cubicle, and we played with email at a time when you could send it, and it would maybe get there today, maybe weeks from now. The routing scheme was, I'll call the 3 computers I know, and if they don't know it, I'll dump it to them, and they'll call the computers they know, and someday it might get where it's going.
Yeah, wow. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. It was kind of fun. That was really early days.
Yeah. All right. So how did it come to an end?
Well, all of a sudden, one day we had a quarterly earnings report. And there'd been a little bit of kind of rumbling that there was something not right up until then, but we'd been consistently hitting over $200 million quarter profit. And suddenly it went to 20-something million. And instantly the whole company reacted. Just totally went. And the idea that the unlimited funds and the gravy train that we'd been on was over. And everybody in the Sierra project basically looked at it and went, we're not going to finish this. There's no way. It's they just don't have the money to spend on this kind of thing anymore. Mm-hmm. If they're acting like they are, the axe is coming. So everybody started figuring out what they were going to do, and the team basically disintegrated, and I forget how many, but at least 10 new companies were started out of that group. Mm-hmm. I don't know if any of them succeeded. I started a company called Gestalt Technocracy.
Good name.
It was a fool's errand. It was fun. It was my mission was to try to recreate the great home for engineers that Atari Corporate Research had been. Unfortunately, I missed one key element there, was that you first have to have the profits to support it. Then you can create great things like that. If you set that if you don't have profit as your mission, you're probably not going to make the other part.
Yeah. Tell me about your exit interview at Atari.
Oh yeah, my boss, Dave Sampson's boss, was a guy named Dale Yoakum. And we didn't get along real well. I thought he made a number of less than intelligent decisions. And so when I left, I actually credited him with the reason I was leaving. And Ted wanted me to talk it through with him, and he decided that when we were having the interview to call Ray Norda, and we went over to his office over at corporate headquarters just across the street, and we sat down and talked through the situation in corporate research at the time, which basically was your manager over all the other projects is kind of not the best manager in the world, and everybody read the corporate earnings report, sees the accountants coming around, and it's disintegrating rapidly. They asked if I had any suggestions, and I basically went, no. It's if you can reassure them you're going to keep funding them, you might keep some of these guys, but otherwise, they all figure their days are numbered. And at the time, when you made staff level, when I went to corporate research, I was promoted to a senior R&D engineer, mm-hmm. and that made you staff level. And at staff level, you got paid a month in advance. First of the month, every month, you got that month in advance. So I told him, I said, you watch, on the second of next month, you're going to get a whole stack of resignations. And that's kind of what happened.
Yeah. Tell me about you were talking about you were designing a disk drive for the Atari 8-bits. I'm always excited to hear about potential 8-bit products that never happened. Why was your disk drive better, besides it was filled with chips?
Well, the initial 810, which was the only one we modified it slightly, only for just more function, just to make it more reliable, basically. But the same essential drive was built and sold through the whole period. There was a recognition that you could get rid of the 36 odd chips or whatever it was, and get it down to a much more manageable number of 4, 5 in modern chips at the time. And so there was a project started to do that inside the home computer division. It was in process right at the point in time, and I was a part of that group. I kind of forgot about that, but that was why I had the Zeus machine in my corner. It was in process, but they're just slow. It was just going to take forever. You get 30 guys in for a disk drive, they had 20, 30 guys in their design meeting.
Yeah. And,
it was going to take forever. Basically, I proposed a Z8 and a Western Digital single chip floppy disk controller that created a package you could do at about 5, 6 chips all together, the whole thing, one board. We were kind of working down that line, and there was an Intel competing processor. I forget what it was. It was the single chip version of the 8088. I didn't like it. I liked the Zilog one better, but the Z8 was the same thing. And that was what we were basically looking at, was going to a single chip computer and an integrated controller and reducing all the chips into a much smaller, much less power consumption package. And it didn't get anywhere. But right after I left Atari, a company from Laguna Hills called Concord Systems got a hold of me and said, would you design a drive like this for us? And their strategy was they were coming out with aftermarket drives for the Commodore, the Atari, the Radio Shack, the Trashes, all of the current models that were out right then, and become a drive OEM kind of company. And they contracted me, and I actually did it. I designed and built and wrote the firmware for a Atari-compatible drive with a Z8 controller and a Western Digital disk drive controller, and we built a few of them. And then I don't think they ever made it into production. Actually, they kind of collapsed about that time. They had a Commodore drive that somebody else did, and they had an Apple drive, the Apple IIe, and they had my drive, and I think they were in some production, but I don't believe they ever actually. We got my drive all signed off. I got all paid. It did everything that it was supposed to do, but I'm not sure they actually shipped any of them.
I will research this. I haven't heard of Concord Data Systems. Were they branded under a name I might know, like Indus or?
It was Concord Peripheral Systems.
Okay.
And they were in Laguna Hills.
All right.
Yeah.
What haven't I asked you yet that I should have?
Maybe about Atari culture.
Please go ahead.
That was the most remarkable thing about working for Atari was the corporate culture. It resulted, I think, partially or largely because of the amount of money we had flowing. But it became when you signed on with Atari, you became an Atarian. You were part of something that was so special. It was like being a Google is these days, but it was kind of a first of its time. I mean, I didn't know of any other company that made you feel like that. Right? You had game rooms. You got to play. It was sanctioned to be, having fun and come and go when you want, wear what you want. It was really, and coming from Commodore, where you were required to wear a white or blue button-down shirt, and be in at exactly a time or get all kinds of trouble, which was a common, standard engineering. And NASA and Rockwell, I was before that, same kind of thing. Sure. Atari was like, You know what I mean? I can come in a T-shirt and I can wear flip-flops and I can show up at 10 o'clock and nobody will care. Yeah. You know, the whole idea that the tech brain is your golden goose, and treat the golden goose well enough and he'll produce more eggs. Mm-hmm. I don't know for sure. I've never researched the history, but Atari was the first place I encountered it. And they shaped my career, and I think a lot of people, I think they shaped the industry by the recognition that you just, in this particular industry, all of your assets go home at night. Mm-hmm. And they only work if they feel good. And so, you know, make sure that they come in the morning and they're happy, because otherwise, you might as well turn the computers off. Yeah? They're not going to produce anything. And that was a recognition there, that was a way of life there that made it where you got up in the morning and couldn't wait to go to work. You know, it was the first time in my life I ever felt like that. And I've recreated that, and I've been part of that in a number of other teams along the way. But just the whole idea that there was a company that large that every single person I knew of got up in the morning and went, I get to go to work today. You know, it was just, it was remarkable and amazing.
Nice.
Kind of ruined me for a lot of years, though. I had a hard time working for anybody else like that. It's like, this isn't fun. It's supposed to be fun. No, it's not supposed to be fun. We're serious.
If you could send a message to the Atari 8-bit computer users that still exist, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Wow. I am so impressed that you guys are still keeping them alive and keeping them going. Good luck. Live long and prosper.
Are you related to Jerry Jessop?
I understand we're related, but I haven't met him, and I don't know. I'm a distant cousin. We're both from Utah, so yeah.
He works at Atari too, so.
Right. Yeah, that's what I've heard. He's somebody we haven't actually crossed paths.
Last question, I think. Do you have any Atari stuff from back in the day? Do you still have a 8-bit machine, or?
I had a huge box of all kinds of stuff, and it got lost in a storage that thing happened. And so, actually, no. At this point, all I've got left is a few pictures here and there, and that's about it. Yeah. Unfortunately. You know Kurt Bedell in the Atari Museum?
Sure.
I had this whole box set up for him, and then I didn't quite get it to him, and next thing you know, everything in that storage unit was gone. And so somewhere out there, there's floating around a whole box of stuff with Sierra Project design schematics and that disk drive I built for Commodore and a bunch of 800s and 400s. One of the fun things about working for Atari at the time was that every single time you got on a different project, they gave you a whole new set of Atari gear to take home. You know, so when I left, actually, I started Gestalt, and part of how I funded it was selling off all of the Atari 810s and 800s and 400s that they'd given me along the
way. Wow, that's crazy. That just kind of money where new department, new equipment, even though if it's the same as the old equipment.
Oh, yeah, well, every project I went on, okay, here's your new set for home. Here's your new set for the office. I just didn't care.
It's crazy.
It's amazing. I tested it once when Vance and I, there were only two of us setting up a diagnostic group to do the salt cartridge. Mm-hmm. We bought these GenRad development systems that were $50,000, $60,000. And I went, you know, just to see, you know, can I spend it? What can I spend? We're getting a printer. I spec'd out for two guys a 600 line a minute band printer with a quietized cover that cost $30,000 in 1980. It went right through. That was delivered next week. Nobody questioned it. They didn't even question it. I mean, this thing would work in a credit bureau, right? I mean, you could send out billing for the AT&T on this thing, and just rocket out the print. It was amazing because we were doing 2 and 3 inch, you know, source code printouts, but you know, it was amazing. You could sit there and talk on the phone next to it while it was firing out 600 lines a minute.
Wow. Great. Well, thank you so much, Jess. This was great.
All right. Hey, I really appreciate it. All right. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.
If you enjoyed these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.